So welcome everybody. I will say a few words in Russian before switching back to English. Добро пожаловать! Сегодня 8-й день первой российской онлайн-конференции про эмбодимент. Это уже 49-я сессия. Мне это очень волнительно и здорово. Меня зовут Юля С. Сегодня я буду на поддержке ведущей Нир Эстарман. Я его представлю через пару секунд. Сегодня с технической поддержкой нам помогает Тимофей. И вы к нам можете обращаться в чате, если вам нужна какая-то помощь. Также в течение сессии вы можете задавать вопросы ведущему. Это можно сделать либо написав вопрос в чат, или нажав кнопку «Поднять руку». В этом случае мы сможем вам включить микрофон, и вы сможете задать свой вопрос голосом. Вопросы можно задавать на английском языке, а можно на русском. Если вам комфортнее, я переведу. Это занятие будет на английском языке, без перевода, но, правда, к 26 февраля мы подготовим субтитры на русском, поэтому вы сможете насладиться этой сессией во всей ее полноте. And I'm going to switch to English and say once again, welcome to the 8th day of the first Russian online embodiment conference. And today I'm really pleased to introduce our speaker. It's the 49th session of our conference. This is Nir Esterman and his session, How Intergenerational Trauma Shapes the Body. Nir is a shadow work and family constellation facilitator and teacher, and an experienced body psychotherapist. He is a teacher of shadow work at EFC Russia and a staff member of the Israeli School of Systemic Constellations. Welcome, Nir. It's really great to have you. Over to you. Would you please tell us more about this, about intergenerational trauma? And yourself.
Hi, доброе утро. Thank you, Julie. Good to be here. So, what is intergenerational trauma? Until, I don't know, let's say 30 or 40 years ago, we didn't know exactly what is trauma or what is a post-traumatic syndrome. In later years, globally, we learned, unfortunately, more about the effects of trauma. And today there's quite a lot of information about personal trauma, what we experience as our own traumatic events. However, it seems that we are affected not just by what happens to us, but we're actually affected by things that happened to our ancestors, to our parents, to their parents, to their parents, and so forth. It's not really a new idea. If we go back to even to the Bible, to the Old Testament, we can see things like children paying for the sins of the fathers in different ways. But until recently, especially in this modern time where we're all individuals and we own our own destiny and we only do what we want, we somehow forgot that we're also a part of something bigger than ourselves. And one thing which is bigger than ourselves is our family, to which we are born, or sometimes adopted. And sometimes we create a new family. And also the society and the culture that we grew up in, that our parents came from, are also a part of who we are, so-called the backdrop or the context in which we live. And surprisingly, at least for some of us, it was for me, if my parents or their parents had to deal with very difficult issues, it affected them in a way which goes down the generation to me and to my children. So how does it work? There are actually several different mechanisms of how the trauma or trauma response actually moves from one generation to another. I will begin with the most biological scientific one, and we'll progress towards other dimensions of it. So on the biological level, there are actually very interesting research. Some of it is a bit new, a lot of it is really very new, about epigenetics, which is about changes in how our genes are being expressed, which are not a result of DNA changes. The genes themselves do not change, but the way they're expressed, either expressed more or less, changes. And it changes as a response to, it always changes all the time as a response to our environment, but it also changes as a response to the environment of our ancestors. For example, and I'll do it with, I'll take an example with mice because they're much easier to explore. And if scientists took mice and, well, basically tortured them with electric shocks and at the same time gave them a smell to smell of cherry blossom. And after a short while, the mice began to feel, to act differently and be more scared and agitated and stressed when they smelled cherry blossom. Okay. Then they allowed these mice to have children and let these children mice grow with different mice, so they didn't grow up with their parents. But when they smelled cherry blossom, for the first time, they were more stressed than other mice. And this effect continued, I think, for 2 or 3 generations, slowly degrading in how stressful the smell was. This is a biological example. Something passes, and there are different theories about what passes from generation to generation. At first, people thought it was DNA methylation, which explains some of the phenomena, but not most of it. And then now they think the different kinds of microRNA pieces that go with the sperm or the egg to the next generation, and again, affect how our genes are expressed. I'm not a scientist, but I was once, but I'm not anymore, so I will not go into these details. I'm just saying there is one layer of intergenerational trauma transfer is biological or epigenetic. Another level, which makes natural sense for all of us, I guess, is a psychological one. If my father, I don't know, was in war and came back with trauma, so I grew up with a traumatized father, and I had to deal with his dissociations or his violence or his drinking or his whatever. Or if my father didn't come back from the war and I had to grow up with no father and a mother that lost a husband and all that. So naturally, it affected me psychologically. And now we can go to more interesting ways of transfer. There is also what I would call either soul level or energetic transfer. So sometimes, although we don't know the story, we feel like we are somehow connected, or family constellation, we call it entangled, with people from our past, even though we never met them, we didn't grow up with them. For example, my father, for example, is an orphan on both sides. He lost his parents at a very young age in the Second World War. And grew up in an orphanage. He doesn't remember his parents. He definitely didn't grow with them beyond the age of 6. And my mother also has lost on her side in later age. And I sometimes found myself having internal experiences that felt like they don't completely belong to me, or at least I couldn't explain them by how I grew up, and by the home that I grew up in, or by my life experiences. Maybe I'll share with you one of my stories. I think it will make more sense. When I was 22 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer, with lymph cancer. Which was quite a big shock, naturally. I was at the time studying computer science and biology and stuff like that. And some people asked me when I was diagnosed, well, why do you think it happened? And the more spiritual or semi-spiritual ones asked me, what is your lesson in this? Or why did you choose to have cancer as a part of your lesson? To which I had two answers. The first was polite, the outside one. Well, I don't know that this is the lesson I chose. I will probably learn what I can from it, but I don't think I invited this on myself. And the internal one was, fuck you. What the hell do you think? Who the hell do you think you are? But I was polite. And I had chemotherapy, which wasn't exactly fun, quite a difficult time, but it was finished and I'm okay now for 18 years. And for several years, I had actually no answer to why did I have cancer. It was, I don't know, bad luck. Maybe some of the scientific research I did as a child, I got in touch with some chemicals. I don't know. No answer there. Then several years afterwards, I was in a workshop. I was already a therapist in training, I think. And it was intuitive writing workshop, and I was just writing, and I was like, I'm angry. Who am I angry at? I'm angry at my friends. Why am I angry at my friends? Because I have to hide things from them. Why do I have to hide things from them? What do I have to hide? That I want to die. And suddenly it hit me. And 2 years before I was diagnosed with cancer, I had a really rough breakup with my first girlfriend, 3 years together, first love, big love. And it hurt. It hurt so much. The part of me just wanted the pain to end, just wanted basically to die if it ends the pain. But it was not allowed, because what would be the effect on my family and on my friends? So I completely repressed this wish. 2 years later, I had 2 tumors. One tumor here, where it hurts in the body, and the second here when I didn't speak. And I didn't make the connection first. It took me this workshop to do the connection, and I was like, whoa, okay. So maybe not a lesson, but I did have a hand in creating this cancer somehow. It didn't have to be cancer, but hey. And it was okay for 2 years or so. It was a good enough explanation. And then I started thinking, but hey, why was this breakup so difficult? I mean, to be honest, I knew we will not get married and have children. Half a year before, my mom asked me about a relationship, and I was like, I love her, but we will not marry. So I knew. So why was it still so difficult? So my mind gave me a temporary answer. You're a very sensitive person. This is why it hurts so much. And again, it worked for a couple of years, or 2 or 3 years. And then I was like, okay, there are lots of sensitive people around who go through breakups and don't have cancer. That's not a sufficient explanation. It was my scientist mind thinking. And then it hit me. When I tried to explain to my friends, or maybe even just to myself, how it feels, this pain, I had 2 sentences to explain it. One was, it's such a shock, it's like the sun doesn't really come up in the east, it comes up in the north, you know? And the second was, if you want to know how I feel, I don't know, imagine your mom tell you one day that she doesn't love you, she never loved you, she's not even your mom. You know? And when I think about it, it's a bit strange way to define how this pain feels. But in 10 years retrospect, I suddenly understood, well, my father is an orphan, and his mom died when he was very young, and his father was actually drafted into the Red Army and died in the front, the Germans, or at least that's what we were told, and we don't really know. And I experienced this breakup like a death, like a death of a mother, although my mother is still alive. And this again made more sense than before. And then when I began working with family constellation, it was all very clear. I was carrying the traumas of my father, of losing a parent, of losing a mother. And the way that I was with this girlfriend was so intense and it was so full. It was not all romantic, you know, it was partially the love of a child to his mother, to someone who is there and loves him. So this was in a way the beginning of looking at intergenerational trauma and how it affects us. So I could go backwards with you. The mother of my mother died from cancer when my mom was 13. Her father, my great-grandfather, died from cancer when mother was 2 years old. So, you know, maybe it was genetic. However, different kinds of cancer, all of them non-genetic. So that's an example of how it works. And can work in many different ways. The bottom line is this. When one of our ancestors went through some difficult trauma, be it war or immigration, hunger, losing a child, losing a partner, losing a parent at a young age, and sometimes even, you know, losing a business or losing land is enough. It leaves a mark in our system. Sometimes the mark is more like a scar, a part of us which doesn't grow like all other parts. Sometimes it's more like a black hole which pulls everything inside it, and something in us wants to get pulled in there. In a systemic view, when we look at people who feel a death wish, who wish to die, or try to commit suicide, we don't look at it like, oh, they couldn't deal with life. We look at it that, oh, they were drawn to be in touch or to be in contact with who was lost in the family, with who is missing in their system. And it's a very powerful pull. Believe me, been there. Yeah. So this is in a very small nutshell, intergenerational transfer of trauma.
Yeah, may I ask you a question then? So you've listed some of the ways that intergenerational trauma can be manifested, but how does one recognize that it is in fact intergenerational trauma?
Okay, that's a good question. So the truth is we cannot always know. I would say first that almost always there is an intergenerational layer. So for example, I may be dealing with, I don't know, issues of self-worth. What is my worth to other people, or to myself, or to life, or to society? And I think it's because my character, or because how I grew up, which is true, but it is also because, for example, my parents both came from Poland and they grew up mostly under communist regime. So personality was not a big thing back then. And well, most of you know it better than myself. And your self-worth was not about what you feel inside, but about how you contribute to society, or how well you take a part in the bigger machine. So it's also a layer, okay? And maybe one of my great-grandparents was a public figure. I don't know. I never knew them, but maybe they're a public figure and went through some, I don't know, I mean, I'm Jewish, okay? So lots of Jewish people had to either hide being Jewish or not being promoted or being discharged from different roles, right? So maybe it happened to them. And again, something in me is afraid of taking too much space because I know there's a price for this. Okay, so I think it just means how I grew up, and maybe my parents and how they grew up, but it can be, and often is more. But still, there are signs. So what are the big signs? The biggest one I identify is when something feels like it's too big, like it's endless, like it has no end. For example, people say, whatever I do, I always feel guilty. It's always my fault. No matter the facts, no matter what I do, I think about it, talk about it, it gets slightly better. Next time it's just the same. Or no matter how much I cry, it's still painful to the same degree, just a drop in an ocean. Or it's like I feel the weight on my shoulders physically and it's just too much. It's like I'm always responsible and nothing helps. Or I try to pull myself up and something pulls me down all the time and it's stronger than me. So if something is stronger, bigger, or endless, it's a good sign that it's not ours originally. That in some way the original experience belonged to an ancestor of ours, or sometimes to our society as a collective trauma. And it's silly to imagine that everything I am is just because of what happened just to me. Because it's not real, We're a part of something greater than us. We're still individuals, but we're not just individuals. So if I feel something is engulfing me, whatever I do feels barely enough or not enough, so there is a meaningful intergenerational trauma layer there. That's one good sign. Another good sign is that it feels like I have no control. Maybe it's not too big, but it's like I have no control over it. For example, a child who always fights. And you tell him, why are you fighting all the time? Why are you so angry? Why are you so, like, I don't know. It's like something is taking hold over me. So in a way, this very smart child tells us that in his or her system, there is violence, there is war, there is something about fighting. And often when we look back, we'll see parents or grandparents who participated in war and maybe had PTSD. And when we work with this, and this is the amazing part, when we actually work with the parent and acknowledge the traumas of the past, quite often the child starts to be less aggressive. Not everything disappears, there are many traumas in our past and we can't necessarily know which way to go. But when I do family constellations or shadow constellations, combination of shadow work and family constellations, there are always signs of what is affecting now that can be touched now. And when we touch what can be affected, then it's like something which was pulling or pushing or making us uncomfortable in different ways suddenly moves away. And we're more free and we're more calm and we're more present. And in a way, we are more we than before. Another good sign if they tell you, well, physically nothing is wrong. We think in psychosomatic or emotional, and you do psychosomatic work and you do body work and you do emotional work and you're getting better, but something just never seems to get touched. Okay? So sometimes this thing it's a sign to look more to the past in order to be able to fully touch it. So I'm not saying that intergenerational trauma is what shapes us, but it's a part of what shapes us.
So Nir, to use the words that you have just said, you said we're working with something that we can finally touch, you know, even though it's quite endless and huge, this issue of intergenerational trauma. But how does this intergenerational trauma take shape in the body? And then the second part of the question is, how can we then work with our own traumas, and say, if we're a trauma specialist, how can we work with the traumas of our clients? And is there a way to access that through the body?
Well, luckily, yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving this talk. So let's see. Why don't we do an exercise? I will guide you through an exercise, and maybe we will be better able to answer this question after the exercise. It's a short exercise, just a few minutes, but still, I'm giving some initial instructions. You don't have to do the exercise. You can stop at any point. If something doesn't feel right to you, don't do that. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is, you will not need to share anything of what you see or feel in your body. You may, of course, but I will not ask you for it. You can do with your information what you will do, so be comfortable about that. And the third thing is, if something stays with you from the exercise that you're not comfortable with, please contact me afterwards if you need any help with it, okay? So please sit comfortably, or lie down or whatever, just be comfortable. And take several deep breaths into your belly, just to be more present. It's always a good practice when you want to go to the past to ground yourself in the present for a moment. So take a moment to feel how your body touches whatever it is you're sitting or lying on. Sense the breath going in your belly and out without any effort, or with minimal effort. Allow your belly to expand, and then exhale and allow the breath to go out. See how you are, feel how you are in your body now. You don't have to change anything. Something will be comfortable, some less. You can change your posture if you like, until you're comfortable. And now we will go together into a journey in our mind's eye, or in other words, in our subconscious. In your mind's eye, imagine yourselves as you are today, just yourselves. And pay attention to how do you feel when you are in touch with yourself in your mind's eye. How is your posture? How is your breathing? How emotional are you? With what emotions are you in touch right now? What happens to your thoughts, to your mind? Where is your attention? Maybe you have some images, or you hear some sounds or music, or an experience come up, or you suddenly remember something. That's okay, just pay attention to it. You don't have to do anything with it. So, and now we add something more. Please choose some physical subject. It could be a physical symptom, it could be with that something happens to you. For example, when I prepared this exercise, I chose a sensation. When I do sports, I get hurt somehow. Every time, no explanation, over many years. But it can be a headache, a recurring headache, or some back pain, or whatever. And in your mind's eye, choose something to represent this body issue. And please choose an issue that intuitively you feel has some connection to intergenerational trauma, and even to a collective trauma, to something, to a period in your history, in the history of your family. You don't have to know the connection, you don't have to know that there is connection. The subconscious will help us and allow you to choose something that feels somehow connected. And in your mind's eye, you now have two things. You have yourself, a representation of yourself, and you have a representation of the body issue. Connect with this body issue. It's like in your mind's eye, you can go there and stand what this representation is and touch it. Like embody it for a moment. How does it feel to be this issue? Is it heavy or light? Does it take lots of space, little space? What is this issue looking at? How does this issue relate to ourselves, to our representation and our mind's eye? What does it want to do? Does it want to move? Does it want to speak? Just pay attention. Everything that comes up, every physical sensation, every emotion, every piece of information. And breathe. And please disengage yourself from this representation of the issue, of the subject. And now we add a third representation. This representation is for the effect of the collective intergenerational trauma, even though we don't know which one yet, on this issue. You don't need to understand what it means. Just pay attention to your body. When you connect or position yourself in your mind's eye where this third representation is. How does it feel to be the effect? What is the effect? How does it feel in the body? Sensations, emotions, thoughts. Where does your attention go? What do you want to do when you're like that? How do you relate to the issue, and how do you relate now to your representation? Just notice, you don't need to do anything. And breathe and disengage. And we'll add one last representation. And this is a representation for a collective trauma that is somehow related to this issue. Maybe you know already what it is. I work in Russia for several years now, so I know of quite a few in Russian history. It may feel big at first, but just pay attention to what happens when you add this fourth and last representation for the collective trauma that has somehow affected you. First, connect with the collective trauma itself and see what comes up. Do it slowly, just touch it on the edges so it won't be too much. And if it feels too much, disengage from it. If you're more experienced, you can get in touch more fully, it's okay, as long as you can disengage. Breathe. See what experiences, what sensations, emotions, body awareness comes to you when you are in touch with this collective trauma. Be it the Great Patriotic War or hunger, slavery in the 19th century, forced immigration, losing lands, anything. You may feel there is more than one such trauma. That's okay, it's collective. There's lots of this trauma. But still sometimes it's more than one because it's war, and then another war, and then another war. So in your mind's eye, you can put like a group of representations for all this collective energy. And step off, disengage from the collective trauma. We've just acknowledged it. It has meaning that we will feel in a moment. Breathe. And now reconnect with the representation of the effect, the third one. Has anything changed in your body sensations, in your emotional level, in how you take space, in your weight, in your relation to other representations, with how your body wants to move or to be? Allow that. And again, breathe and disengage. Breathe in between representations. And reconnect with the representation of the issue. How does the issue feel now? Sensations, emotions, any embodied characteristics, thoughts. How comfortable is the issue now? Has anything changed about it, about how it feels? And again, breathe, disengage from this representation, and we go back to our first representation of ourselves. And we connect with ourselves in our mind's eye. How do we feel now to ourselves? How does it feel in the body? What is our level of comfort? Has anything changed? Is there some internal movement? Do we look at things slightly differently? Maybe not, it's okay. Just a 10 minutes exercise. Maybe yes. Breathe, pay attention to anything which have changed. Breathe a couple times more. And disengage and disconnect from this entire exercise. Go back to the here and now, to your physical body. Move your body a bit. Touch your body slightly. Come back here. If you want to share anything of the experiences or ask about them, we're more or less in the time for questions, I think. So you can either by writing in the comments, and Julie will read it for you, or by asking for permission to speak. There is a way to raise your hand, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And while people are thinking, and you can write your responses and your questions in the chat. Thank you for this exercise. It's a beautiful way of, taking the time to connect with. There were 4 parts, right? The representation of the self. What was the second one?
The issue, physical issue.
The physical issue, and the effect, and the broader, say perhaps the broader trauma, right?
Yeah. Usually when I work, I don't usually jump first to the collective trauma. But because I've been teaching Russia for several years in EFC, I've seen that the collective traumas in Russia are so embedded. They're so much a part of how we live, and I have the same experience in Israel. Yeah, it's not Russian specific, but I experienced it, and I feel that quite often, in a way, we just miss this layer. It's like even if we go to intergenerational trauma, then we focus on our family only, and it felt right to put light, to shed light also on this option of seeing what affects us, which isn't necessarily personal family stuff, but also collective stuff.
And there's a comment in the chat box. It's from Vila. He's saying, Nir, could you share your story about grounding that we talked about before?
Which story about grounding? Please remind me.
Vila, if you would like to unmute yourself and share more of what you meant by that.
I'm not sure Vilya is connected fully right now. Ah, there she is. Yes, yeah, Vilya, which story?
Yeah, some days we have talked about how collective trauma or family trauma shape the body. So this is the topic of this session. And you have mentioned that while you start to explore your personal grounding, you found some very curious connection with the experience of your family, of your parents.
Okay, so I have probably 15 such stories about my family and grounding. Let me choose one. Because in a way our family is our root system. So when there is a cut there and something is missing there, then we're not as stable as we think we are. And so, yeah, for myself, let's see. Well, both of my parents are basically Holocaust survivors, and they weren't in the camps, but they lost family, and my mom was born in the Warsaw Ghetto, etc. And for many, many years, I was going around really working hard on grounding and making my roots stronger and deeper and everything, but it could just not go beyond a certain level. It was just, in a way, it felt like you put a tree in a plant in some container, and it's all roots. There is nothing left but roots, but it can't go beyond that. So I had lots of roots, and they were very strong. But at the same time, in the body, there was always some sort of extra efforts to be stable. And I learned many ways to be very stable, embodiment-wise and also otherwise. But something was never fully there. And when I actually did some exercise about resourcing myself, and I was remembering a very pastoral place with a small stream and water, and I felt very comfortable and supported. And I felt myself going down into the water in a very gentle and nice way. And then suddenly I found myself, because I was so well resourced, finally able to go below the level of the ground. And I found myself like under the ground in my mind's eye. And it was quiet, and it was not well lighted, a bit scary, and very lonely. And I could see like I could see my roots, but from below, and I could see like there was 2 layers of ground for me. One layer, which was what I'm used to be on, to which I've been rooting all my life, but this was not the real one. The real ground was a few meters beneath that, and from this ground I was disconnected. And then again, it came to me that my father, who was an orphan, he does not remember his family at all. He could have remembered technically, but he doesn't remember his entire early childhood, which is a trauma sign, one of the ways to cope with trauma. And in a way, to make up for his very unstable beginning in life, he created a complete new ground, very stable. My father is a very stable person. We all are very stable people. But I lived my life above, like 3 meters above the real ground, believing it was the real ground. And only when I got down there, I could actually start, and it's still a working process in some ways. I could start to really connect beyond. And the body effects, I will say it, the center of my weight became lower in my body, because I could be in touch with my lower parts. I could feel my legs more, I could feel my pelvis more. And it also freed more energy to do other things, because I wasn't busy all the time, subconsciously withholding myself strongly to the ground so as not to fall. Always also good for back pain. Yes, I'm not sure this was the one you meant, Vilja, but this is the one that came up. So I hope that's useful. Yes, more questions, please.
There are some comments, Nir, in response to the exercise that you gave. So Natalia is saying, now I feel more space and validity in how I am. Maria said that it was very emotional and uniting, that I'm not so bad as they had to go through this, about the women in my family and the country in the past, and all of them and us are so lonely. And then Sonia says she's also feeling more spacious inside. And there's a comment from Olga saying, for me, I have a strange feeling that the issue is not mine, it's more about them, and there it should stay. So I feel more disconnection and sort of a denial of the issue. For sure, less shame and more confidence. And Natalia is saying also a lot of compassion to people with similar roots. I want a big mother's hug for them.
Yeah. So sometimes we identify so much with stuff which is not ours that it's difficult for us to realize that it's not ours, or if it's not only ours. And sometimes when we touch it, it's very easy to feel that there is differentiation. Oh, this is mine, this is not mine. This is partially mine. And sometimes it feels like it's completely not mine and it happens. That's okay, actually. But it may feel strange if we're very identified with it. I would like to say that, especially on the collective level, it's not always like very well known, or people like don't think about it too much. But for example, in Russia, I found very often the archetype of the missing man. Like the man who went to war and didn't come back, or went to war and came back, but not really, or were drunk, or left for another woman. And you see generation after generation of children growing up without a father or with a partial father, and the mother and the grandmother have to take care about it. This is also a collective layer of intergenerational effect. It also affects us because it means a woman has to be strong. a woman has to be attractive, a woman has to be different things, which are not related necessarily to what her mother told her or to what she sees on TV. It's like, well, if my grandmother wasn't so beautiful, she wouldn't have found a man to protect her. So I have to be beautiful, you know, and it's all subconscious. And when we can start to actually, when we can start making this differentiation, then the have to can go away. I can still be beautiful if I want to, but I don't have to be beautiful in order to survive. I don't have to be strong in order to survive. I'm strong anyway, because we all have everything else. So, time for one last question before Julie takes.
Yes, we've got about 5 minutes left, and there's one more comment from Wieland. People are saying that they've experienced the same thing. There was a flash mob in Russian social media. It was called "I'm Not Afraid to Say," where women would share their stories, including this, well, mostly stories of their trauma. And Vida says, when I was reading these stories, many people had the reaction of, I feel that this has happened to me, although it never actually happened in my own life, in my personal story. And then as I was speaking to older women, you know, they would find such stories in their families. And this is something that the others experience when working with their clients as well.
Yes, it happens a lot, and we don't even think about it. For example, I don't know, suppose there was sexual abuse of boys 5 generations backwards. No one knows anything about it. But the person suffers from very contracted anus all the time. Now, it affects his entire embodiment, and it affects his physicality as well. It will also affect how he reacts to different sexual stimulus. For example, for someone, even if his partner, for example, wants to dominate, it may actually feel very frightening, even though in his mind, like, oh, this is cool, but in the body, it's like, oh, I've been there somehow, I don't know how, it doesn't feel good. Oh yeah, it feels good. Oh no. And there's lots of stuff like that in our system that we're just not aware of. And it affects us on all levels, physical, emotional, reactiveness level. Yes, thanks, Belia, for sharing this. So, how do we stand with the time, Julie? Time for one more? Or
yes, there are 3 more minutes to look at some questions.
I see there's more questions in the chat, yes.
There are some comments. There was a session yesterday and a similar topic came up, only regarding racial segregation when working with clients from the United States. Collective traumas and some cultural traumas that came up.
Definitely. I met from the last conference, I spoke in a woman, it was Afro-American, whatever, what is called politically correct, 300 years ago from Africa. And that's the main part. And she shared with me that when she went to Africa on some professional trip, she experienced super powerful emotions and experiences with local people in a church. And she said, like, it was like I was representing my ancestors who were taken away, and churchgoers, they apologized like they were the ones who let us be taken. And there was some other guy there from Europe who said that he could now see that his physical issues of diseases in the family had to do with them being in the slave trade business. It's like, no, 300 years ago, and it's still very much alive. Yeah. The tapestry of life is very big. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Nir. So it is nearly 11:55. So if I may give some organizational information before handing back over to you, so you can share some of your top tips with us, something that we can all take away from this session. All right. Еще раз спасибо Ниру за эту очень интересную сессию. про межпоколенческую травму. Спасибо вам за то, что вы участвовали в ней. Следующая наша сессия начнется в 1:00 дня по Москве. Это будет Герт Ван Люен с сессией про йогу критического выравнивания и терапию. А сейчас в чате, я думаю, что уже появились все ссылки, по которым вы можете найти полное расписание, записи всех сессий, которые можно смотреть бесплатно до 26 февраля. И информации, конечно, очень много, классных выступлений очень много, поэтому если вам хочется продолжить это удовольствие, смотреть их после 26 числа, более бережно как-то распределять время, есть возможность приобрести видеозаписи, есть несколько пакетов доступных для этого. И также, если вы хотите все-таки сделать такой себе марафон и смотреть только вживую, и только до 26 числа, но вы хотели бы поддержать эту конференцию, сказать спасибо за то, что здесь происходит, вы также можете сделать donation, тоже по ссылке, любой комфортной для вас суммой. Мы будем тоже вам за это очень признательны. И напоминаю также, что 5% от всех средств, которые к нам поступают, мы передаем в проект «Такие дела», который помогает разным благотворительным организациям информационно. Вот. Поэтому спасибо вам, спасибо Ниру. Я передаю снова слово Ниру для того, чтобы он дал нам какое-то напутствие. So, Nir, you've got about 3 or 4 minutes to share anything else you wanted to share with us, some top tips of yours.
Top tips. Well, man, I guess that always the number one top tip is to acknowledge, is to be aware. If we are able to ask ourselves this question, not where does it come from, oh my God, but is it possible that whatever it is that I'm dealing with, physical, emotional, relationship, medical, and business-wise, whatever, is there an option that a part of my difficulty here, a part of what I'm not able to solve yet, did not begin with me? And just let our subconscious answer this question, let our body answer the question. If the answer is yes, then it's just good to acknowledge it. There is something here before me. And there's many ways to work with it. There's lots of family constellation and systemic work in Russia. So, you have lots of people to work with. I also do this kind of work and training, family constellation, and shadow work online. But the main thing is acknowledge it. If you pay attention to the process that we did, so we said there was me and there was an issue, and then we acknowledge there is some effect on us, and then we acknowledge the source of the effect. And this is a very basic pattern which we can use in different ways, but whenever we acknowledge the effect and the source of the effect, and then quite often we will immediately feel some form of change, some sort of release, and some sort of differentiation from the over-identification that we do subconsciously. So this would be my top tip, I guess. I also want to say again that if you are left with anything from the exercise that you would like to share with me, I will give Julie contact details that you can pass on to the conference system, so you can write me and share or get support if anything comes up which you don't know how to deal with. So don't stay with anything alone if it doesn't feel right to stay with it alone, and if you don't have any other support. Yeah, I wish us all lots of intergenerational health.
Thank you, Nir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
And I want to second something that one of the participants is writing. Maria says that it was very deep, caring, and touching. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
We can stop the recording.